Hello and welcome to On the Record, a debate-style television talk show where Bahamians will find the balanced, true and open debate they've been looking for. Cannabis is also known as marijuana. It's a psychoactive drug from the cannabis plant intended for medical or recreational use. Some abuse it, some cherish it, some use it for religious ceremonies. The Chinese Emperor Shang was the first recorded in history to have explored marijuana in 2737 BC. His focus was on its powers as a medication for rheumatism, gout, malaria, and oddly enough, absent-mindedness. The emperor made mention of the intoxicating properties of marijuana, but the medicinal value was far more important. Marijuana, after decades of recreational use and of course abuse, has become the hot topic worldwide once again. Many countries have rediscovered the somewhat demonized bush and made it the rave for medical purposes. The legalization of marijuana is currently being bandied about in the Bahamas. So tonight, we discuss marijuana, legalize it or criticize it. Our guests are attorneys Fane Thompson and David Cash and Dr. Frederick Smith, a nephrologist. It's all on the record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break.
On is here. Rev Go Play. Go everywhere with Rev Go.
Is your loved one celebrating a birthday? Or maybe they're commemorating a special occasion and you don't know what to get them? Why not get them something custom made from Executive Printers? At Executive Printers, you can create personalized calendars, greeting cards, and even playing cards just for them. A one-of-a-kind gift. They can even do personalized cups, mugs, keychains, coasters, and notepads. So come in and place an order today. We are located on Jerome Avenue South, or log on to epbahamas.com for more info.
Welcome back to On the Record. Marijuana, legalize it or criticize it, is our topic. Our discussion guests for this portion of the show are Fane Thompson, trial attorney, practicing civil and criminal law. He is also a law lecturer and radio personality. Also attorney David Cash. He is our guest for this half of the show as well, and he is a practicing criminal defense lawyer. Attorney Cash is also a former public prosecutor for the Attorney General's office. Gentlemen, welcome to On the Record. This show, like so many others, came out of a spirited public discussion. And I have to admit that I never thought in my lifetime that we would even be having this discussion, knowing the feelings of the generation of my parents and even grandparents about marijuana and what it means. But let's particularly, let's sort of start and lay the groundwork for the discussion. One of the things that we've noticed is that there's a lot of flippant discussion almost about the legalization of marijuana. From a legislative standpoint, what would it take to legalize this as people are discussing it?
A simple amendment to the Dangerous Drugs Act. It does
One stroke of the pen.
That's it. You walk into Parliament, you make the amendments, you remove marijuana from Indian hemp, as it is known, from one schedule to another. You put in the regulations, and you ensure that the doctors and the various social workers, and it's regulated and the way it should be, as perhaps alcohol is regulated, and that's it. It involves no great difficulty. It's a political problem for our local politicians, and it's a political problem for our country.
And it's also appropriate because although marijuana is regulated or prohibited under the Dangerous Drugs Act, it is neither dangerous nor is it a drug. And so all that has to be done, I think Parliament meets every Wednesday, is they go into Parliament and remove Indian hemp from the list of exempted substances, which it ought to be.
What? Let's go before we get to the why it ought to be. Historically, why has it been categorized as a dangerous drug?
In the 1980s, we found ourselves in a particularly difficult position. In fact, let's go back as far as the 1950s. It was legal in the Bahamas, in the sense that it was not prohibited. In the 1980s, I think we were caught up in the so-called hullabaloo of the drug war. Politicians were locally compromised. They had very little option. There was a huge transshipment movement of drugs between South America and into the United States via the Bahamas. Some say as much as 70% of drugs traveling through came through the Bahamas. They were forced then to take a stand. And that stand was to capitulate in many, many ways. One way that they capitulated was to give the Americans what they wanted, which was a full-bore drug war using OPBAT, O-P-B-A-T, you're familiar with that, Jerome, and various other facilities like amendments to the Dangerous Drugs Act, amendments to the Firearms Act, and a whole host of other amendments, the tracing and forfeiture of the proceeds of dangerous drugs. A whole series of amendments were put in place to essentially join in on drug war, which was a political decision which our country capitulated to. For political reasons. It had nothing to do with the danger, so to speak, of marijuana. Had absolutely nothing to do with it.
I was saving this for later on in the show, but since you brought it up, I think it's the appropriate time to bring it up. I remember specifically 1981, Bob Marley would have come to the Bahamas and held that infamous or famous concert at the Queen Elizabeth Sports Center. I remember the angst that it caused in the community. I remember my late grandfather in particular. I don't think he slept the entire night during that concert. He was so upset about how could the government allow this to happen. And I think at the time the police allowed concert goers to openly smoke marijuana. And a lot of people would think or would say that legitimized it within the community. It certainly led to an increase in the Rastafarian movement, but it gave some, in the eyes of many, some legitimacy to this smoking of marijuana.
That's too simplistic, Joel.
Really?
Yes. I think basically what happened was that at that time the Bahamas government agreed with certain very influential Bahamian citizens. You know who they are. I think you remember that, Mrs. Hannah, Mr. Fred Mitchell, two prominent persons who were involved in that so-called invite. I think this was simply a recognition of the fact that there were persons who smoke and use marijuana in the country. First and foremost, let me make it very clear. I don't use marijuana. But there's a political and economic argument which takes me to the position that I have taken insofar as suggesting that we have to do something about it. Our country changed simply because of the realities of the times. The allegation of the nation for sale, the allegations which were leveled at the Pilling regime for political reasons that this was a drug-infested community. We changed because we were forced to. We joined in on a drug war because we were faced with realpolitik, do so or die. And I think that was really the historical reason for the big change in the country. It didn't have to do with seeking to infect young people with the wickedness of Bob Marley. He wasn't a wicked man. I think it had a lot to, and there were some conservative voices, very influential, who did not like the fact that he visited the Bahamas. But that's not what changed the Bahamas. By then, I'm sure there were a large number of Bahamians consuming marijuana.
I didn't say that they weren't. But, okay. Now, the argument is, David, that a lot of criminal activity is a lot of times associated with the smoker, fellas on the blocks, smoking weed and drinking Guinness, and, they go out and engage in all kinds of illegal activity. That is the perception. How do you make an argument to legalize something that is associated with criminal activity?
Well, there are a number of things, Jerome. First of all, legalization would actually have an effect of causing a downturn in crime, because the police this year, they said they seized 17,000 pounds of marijuana, which in street value would be $17 million, right? And because it is illegal, that would mean that money is in the hands of persons, criminal organizations, people who are willing to operate outside of the law. And so if you give the police the benefit of the doubt and they seized all the marijuana that was in the country, that no one else had marijuana, no one else was able to smoke, that would mean that these criminal organizations have $17 million that they could use to buy guns, that they could use to control their territory. But if you make it legal, then a person who wants to use marijuana can go to someone who has a license, and they wouldn't be funding criminal organizations. And the other thing is that marijuana is not just used by people on the blocks or people who you think are not functional members of society. It is used by the young, it is used by the old, it is used by women, it is used by men. Marijuana use is across a kaleidoscope of Bahamian society.
You're quite right. There's pervasive. I mean, I know people who smoke on a regular. But how do you begin to decriminalize it? Because that's how it is seen. I know my grandparents, these fellas smoking dope and robbing, and that's the perception that people have, that the men and women out there who are involved in criminal activity are somehow linked to marijuana and or drug use. Or the people who want the drug and can't afford to get it are going to commit petty crimes because they need a $10 joint or a dime bag or whatever you call it. I want this. And do you akin to that too? But it is addictive. I know people who are addicted. They get up in the morning.
But this is how you do it, Jerome. This is how you separate the criminality. With alcohol, if someone gets drunk and assaults someone, you do not punish the drink. You punish the assault, right? If someone consumes alcohol and they are reckless in driving their car, you don't punish them for drinking. You punish them for reckless driving. And it would be the same thing with marijuana. The thing about marijuana as a crime is that a person who is arrested for possession of marijuana, they are told that, okay, you committed a crime. But every crime is supposed to have a victim. If someone commits fraud, the victim is the person who's been defrauded. If someone is charged with stealing, the victim is someone who had something stolen from them. But possession of marijuana has no victim other than the person who is being charged. Because if you're smoking marijuana in your yard, in your own house, you're not doing anything to injure another person. So how could it be a crime?
He's drawing the distinction that crimes ultimately have victims. Where's the victim in the so-called matrix when it comes to the use of dangerous drugs? They are both victims and alleged quote-unquote criminals. But more so, and I like this. In fact, the position that Mr. Gash took was interesting. It's an argument that we have placed on our Facebook page a long time ago, Citizens Against Prohibition, Bahamas, that in fact this is a specialized form of criminality which ought not to be criminalized. In fact, it ought to be dealt with as if it was a health-related concern, not a victim crime, not a victim-related crime. It's a very typical argument which is advanced many times when it comes to this kind of business. We have criminalized the behavior which should not have been criminalized for political reasons, and not in the partisan sense, but for reasons of the relationship that we have with the American government. This became a crime. Because ultimately we had to fall in line, step in line with the quote-unquote war on drugs. But we know that it's not a war on drugs, it's a war on people. Because again, we haven't criminalized the abuse of the substance in specific circumstances, as Mr. Prakash indicated. We have criminalized the persons who use it in circumstances where this is a victimless crime.
People will argue, we've got to go to a break, people will argue that there are more deaths related to drinking and driving and alcohol use and abuse than there is to marijuana use.
Well, as a matter of fact, Jerome, there is no pathologist in the Bahamas who has ever determined a cause of death of anyone who has died in the Bahamas to be as a result of overdose on marijuana. Marijuana is just not a dangerous drug. We've classified it this way for reasons unknown to persons in my generation, and now you have a generation of persons coming up now that are here. They're professionals in society. They grew up in the society. The generation that I belong to is very likely the most educated generation of Bahamians that has ever existed. And we have a totally different perception of marijuana. We do not see it as criminal behavior. we do not see it as dangerous. We do not see it as a drug. And we see the prohibition of it as completely arbitrary because we do not criminalize or we do not prohibit every single drug that is psychoactive, or we don't criminalize every single drug that is mind-altering.
Gentlemen, we're at the point of our first break. We certainly have a lot to discuss in this show. Later on in the broadcast as well, we're going to look at the medicinal properties of this and certainly that side of the argument as well. But stay with us. We are back with more On the Record right after this.
This is an exciting time. We're launching a new and amazing app. It's all about the customer experience, and this has actually been in play for quite a while now in terms of the development and getting it ready for this moment.
We've set out a very clear agenda in Alive that the smartphone device, is going to become the center of everybody's life.
All you have to do is to be a customer of ours, and you can get this app and you can enjoy and have access to our network to be able to watch and view a number of channels, as much as 51 channels.
The RevGo product, building on the great platform that Cable Bahamas and Rev have put down over many years, is the start of that journey to people truly living their life through their smartphone.
And it's going to make the experience more enjoyable, more easier for people to access channels. So we can't wait to get to phase 2 to launch that to our customers as well.
And it's fantastic that the Rev team has brought this to life so quickly in Alive's evolution.
Yep. I got you.
I really appreciate you helping us out.
No problem, buddy.
Yeah, but thanks for helping us all.
Let me see you.
What happened, babe? What you mean?
Our news weekend has moved to 7:30.
We are back with more On the Record. Tonight we're discussing marijuana, legalize it or criticize it. Our guests are attorneys Fane Thompson and David Cash. As we went into the break, we really started to delve into, I guess, a shift in the perception, the use, the acceptance of marijuana. I know, I go into settings with young people, and when I was that age, it was something that was shunned upon. I mean, you knew people who did it, but it was not done openly. I go to places where I see young people rolling up a joint, they smoke, and there is a level of comfort that is associated with that did not exist 20, I would say maybe even 10, 20, 30 years ago. We have really changed the way we view this.
Well, Jerome, we're moving at a rapid pace when it comes to marijuana and a number of other things. It's just like alcohol in younger circles. It's just another thing that people use when they're socializing with each other, but they're not doing anything criminal. They're not doing anything criminal.
Well, the argument, and people argue, oh, it's affecting their brains, they don't have the get up and go, they don't have the drive. I hear so many different arguments.
The scaremonger and the fearmonger has the highlands when it comes to this conversation. Marijuana use in its early stage, historically, I'm sure, was steeped in a lot of stereotype, which had to do with the criminality inherently of someone who wants to smoke, because that's the way it started.
And you was
Exactly.
the term good for nothing.
Right, and this culture exploded. Remember now, Richard Nixon started this whole thing, the so-called drug war in 1971 or thereabouts. And what did he say? These are his famous words by H.R. Haldeman, who talked about him afterwards. It's all about the blacks. It's all about the blacks. It started with a racial history. It was generalized by way of international policy. It was embraced in the Bahamas, and we mimicked the American drug war and all of their prejudices and biases. So that's how, to a large extent, if you use drugs, something must be wrong with you. If you're black, you can't have no sense. And that's why Rastafarians in this country were so terribly demonized by use of marijuana. Again, I don't use it, but I get and I understand how the demonization took place. What has happened over the past few years is that the drug war has taken multiple hits. In Portugal in 2001, where it's been decriminalized, and we've had pervasive security and peace return to the streets of Portugal. The stereotypes are being removed. So the color connection to the use of drugs in the black community in the Caribbean one day perhaps will be removed. Rastas will not carry the burden of having to be the ones who use it and argued that from a freedom of choice point of view, they had a right to use it, for religious reasons. It's a steady progression back to civility and sense. Marijuana was not always illegal in the Bahamas.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, I as a youngster growing up, being a Rastafarian, smoking marijuana, completely shunned upon.
Yes.
And anybody who was associated with that was almost seen as an outcast. But something that I'd like to move into, there's no getting around that we have a crime problem. And it is associated in many instances with the drug trade and drug use. Does this high murder rate, the high level of criminality, have anything to do with these illegal drug trade or the narco economy?
Absolutely, it absolutely does. And this is because the criminal organizations, they have to have a stock in trade. They have to have something that allows them to make money in order to fund their criminal activities. Marijuana has a great demand. Just by the fact that DEU could say that they seized $17 million worth of marijuana just last year in 2017. And so if you say that DEU seized, let's give them, let's say they seized 10%. That would mean that we have a $170 million marijuana industry in this country that's going straight to criminals.
Narco economy.
So, and they will use that in order to do certain things, in order to defend and expand their territory. And they don't care if they use murder to do it. And they have $170 million, or they control a $170 million industry. They could use that money to do other things. Corrupt public officials, police officers, customs officers. It's very bad for our society that it continues to be prohibited, and the economics of it goes to these criminal organizations.
So what then happens if you take a criminal industry or an industry that's based on the illegal sale of a substance and now you make it legal? Well, what happens to those people? What, they go out of business? What they gonna do?
There's a quick answer to that. In California, what has happened in the last few days of legalization, Mexican drug cartels are complaining because the price of their disposition of marijuana into the United States has dropped. California now has taken away the reason for the criminality. You can go into and buy and so forth.
Yeah, but what
so
happens?
that has changed.
What happens to the guy who have the little business through the corner, who operating out his back door?
I mean, he should perhaps be considered for a license to sell it legally. He should perhaps be considered for that reason. And this is going to be interesting when we get to that point in the Bahamas. What are we going to do with these young men? What's going to happen to them? Because and Mr. Cash made the point that the economics is one thing, but Jerome, consider this. Politically and economically, our democracy has been destabilized because of prohibition. Like he said, police officers, customs officers, judges, et cetera, compromise. The damage done to the family. Young men can't have decent jobs after they've had one experience with the court. 2 packages of marijuana. You are a trafficker. It's nonsense. The rules, the laws themselves are destabilizing our democracy. We've had to change and amend the Bail Act in the most extreme ways because of the pressure brought by the high homicide rate. What I'm saying to you that the narco economy has actually damaged and hurt our democracy. So for those reasons, we have to consider legalization.
And the other thing, Jerome, is that one of the reasons why young men join these gangs is because they have very little other opportunities. The seventh largest economy in the world, California, has just legalized marijuana. They are expecting over $1 billion just in tax revenue from that industry alone. We're talking about having farming, having people do farming, but historically, the way you have economic success from farming is to have a single cash crop. The cotton industry created the American empire, the sale of cotton, and then the sugar industry did the same thing. What crop has a greater demand globally than marijuana right now? We should be training our young people to grow marijuana.
But do we, okay, and I want to use a scenario. Okay, let's say hypothetically we legalize it, okay? And we know the potential that it has to earn money. Do we not then set ourselves up economically for the same kind of dynasty we see with gaming? Because
That's a good point.
You know,
That's a good point.
I remember when numbers were illegal
very
and
good point.
people made money.
That's a
You know,
very
they
good
had
point.
bookies on the street and people doing all kinds of things and people's making a little side money. But now it's now legal. You have these gaming empires set up and they shut out the small man.
It's a very good question. I'll tell you why. Because the model that we intend to utilize to, as it were, legalize is going to be important. Do we want another situation where just 8 Bahamian families co-op gaming, control the
Yeah,
industry?
that's what's gonna happen.
Or do we want a situation where certain Bahamian families own and control the port, the way we've done with the Arawak key development? This is going to be important. It's going to be a great debate. Bahamians listening to my voice must demand that their politicians not allow this to become a friends, family, and lovers type solution to a very serious problem. Empower these young men and women. Let them become entrepreneurs in a business which they should have been access to a long time ago. It's going to be very important what happens, and Bahamians must be very vigilant and not allow politicians to friend, family, and lover this industry. The way in which we know that, for example, legalized gaming has, and the Arawak
But
key
Fane,
development has
how
been
do
done.
you take the fella who all his life has made his money through selling drugs, dime bags, etc., out of his back door? He has no training in how to set up a business. He has no bank account.
Au contraire, I'll tell you why. Think about it. He's been a successful seller on an illegal street.
Yeah, but an illegal trade is easy to do.
Coming into the
you
mainstream.
don't have the regulations. I mean, right down to getting a business license. I mean,
sure
you look at the things that prohibit business, everyday business in this country right now, and now you want to take these individuals who needed nothing to set up shop other than just a supply, and now you want to. I just don't see how that will work. I don't see the connection. We can't do it. I mean,
I think it happens very easily. I think it happens very seamlessly. The brother on the street will understand. I have to set up a certain situation. I'm legal. I have to go in and apply for my business license, pay my national insurance, hire my staff, and I have to be responsible. Bahamians are natural entrepreneurs. They'll find a way to survive and to shift and to adjust.
And it's also good for society, Jerome, because we can take a minimalist view of the industry itself. Because yes, you have people who are going to grow and sell and consume marijuana by smoking it. You're going to have, there's hemp, there are healing products, there is paper, there is rope, there are all kind of products that this plant would have industries for, and then the industry is separate unless you have it as all in house. But someone has to grow it, someone has to distribute it, someone has to sell it, and so the money could funnel to different areas. It doesn't have to be a single I own the entire industry as it is with other industries we've legalized.
Would the legalization, would it be full legalization, meaning that, hey, I could have a backyard plant, I could, put it in my planter under the window, I could do...
The model is going to be important, Jerome. I think the model is going to be very important to the extent we have to decide if we're going to... The Canadians have split growth, sale, and distribution, and you have to get separate licenses for that. Okay. And the monies that you use, for example, to police it, you shift that to health, education for young people, and so forth, the way the Portuguese did. There are examples, there are laboratory experiments which have shown how to move it from a criminal platform to a health-related platform, and you utilize the money the same way. For example, Mr. Troy Clark, he wouldn't lose the work of business that he does. It would simply be shifted from a criminal as reference, from let's say some kind of dissuasion panel, as opposed to a court. Persons would no longer be detained at Sundance because they're marijuana users, which I've seen in courts happen many, many times. There's a way to do this once we sit down and logically think about the new model that we intend to employ.
The key word here is logically, and sometimes we move into these things and does not seem that we apply logic.
But the difficulty is sometimes we just do things because that's what we've always done. So we've always prohibited marijuana, so we just want to keep it prohibited. But the first thing we have to do, and it's not just being done in these developed countries like states in the United States and countries in Europe, Jamaica has decriminalized marijuana. You can have up to 2 ounces of marijuana. Belize, a democracy in CARICOM that is younger than the Bahamas by some 10 years, they have decriminalized up to 10 grams, and we're lagging behind. The first thing we have to do is take it away from being a criminal offense.
Absolutely.
Because the question we have to ask ourselves as Bahamians, is it worth it? Yes. Is it worth it for someone to lose their job or for a $2 joint? And if they lose their job, then
joint
what
costs $2? I'm just curious. Sorry, go ahead.
for them to lose their job over a small amount of marijuana. If that marijuana is in separate packages, now they'll be charged with possession of drugs with intent to supply. They'd be denied bail when they go to the magistrate's court. Sometimes these persons are brought to court on a Friday afternoon where you can't even find a judge that day. So you have to be remanded to prison where you'll be in a cell, you'll sleep on the floor, in an overcrowded cell with real criminals. And then you've now lost your job, you've been brought before the courts, and if you are convicted, dangerous drugs with intent to supply, it remains on your record. There are only a few offenses in the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act that you cannot ever be rehabilitated from. Possession of dangerous drugs is one of them. Possession of dangerous drugs with intent to supply is one of them, alongside serious offenses like armed robbery, murder, and rape.
And you know, from my point of view, Jerome, this has been part of my campaign over the past few years. We are destroying too many young black men in this country for nonsense. And my group, Citizens Against Prohibition Bahamas, is simply saying we must stop the destruction of our young men. We have to stop the destruction.
I agree with
it's
you.
a national emergency. Yeah. And if the law is an ass, find a way to amend the law to save our young men. It's not part of American foreign policy anymore, which is hardcore, because as we know, the Americans are beginning now to liberalize their views.
They moved in another direction.
Exactly. So it's now time for our politicians to develop some girth and some gumption and save our young men.
Well, as we go into the break, I'll just say this, that they will have a hell of a fight on their hands with the church.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, gentlemen, thank you so very much. We are at the halfway point in our show tonight. We're discussing marijuana, legalize it or criticize it. Our guests for this first half, attorneys Fane Thompson, David Cash, both trial attorneys. When we return, we're going to take a look at the effects of marijuana on the human body and also hot topic, medical marijuana. Join us on the other side of the break for more on the break.
Are you afraid to swipe your card and you don't like to carry cash? If so, you need checks. Executive Printers can make checks for all your needs. They have laser checks, personal checks, continuous checks, and more. All checks have up to 15 security features, so you know you'll be protected. You can even customize your checks. Come and see one of our experts today, or log on to epbahamas.com for more info.
Live the HBO Go experience. Online service with HBO's most selected content at your fingertips. Obtain the HBO Max package now and get the 3rd month free and start enjoying from any mobile or computer all episodes of your best series, blockbusters, and so much more. Make all the content from HBO yours. HBO Go is HBO wherever you want. Sign up for HBO from Rev and be entered to win an all-expense-paid trip for 2 to Hollywood to visit your favorite HBO set.
Welcome to the second half of tonight's show. Our guest for this half is a nephrologist, Dr. Frederick Smith. Also happy to have attorney Fane Thompson continue with us. Our topic tonight, marijuana, legalize it or criticize it. Dr. Smith, welcome to the show. You would have been watching and listening to the first portion of the show, but we want to really now delve into the medicinal properties and look at that side of the debate, because there is within the medical community some debate about whether marijuana is good or bad. It is a plant said by some to be very bad, to have effects on the body and mind, mind altering. It's been called, but there is a difference in the medical and recreational marijuana. Is that correct? I want to talk to see about what, because some people speak about the medicinal properties and then others speak about it in a recreational sense. So what is the difference?
So I think that what we have to take into consideration is the plant itself. So if we talk about the plant itself or the cannabis itself, there are compounds in it. And the compound that becomes active is the cannabinoids that are in it. We have quote unquote cannabinoids that have more of a beneficial effect, and we have the ones that have the psychotropic or the mind altering, which you'd call it effects. So again, if you take the marijuana plant and you break it up into the cannabinoids, and they're greater than 19 cannabinoids in a typical marijuana plant, and each being different depending on the strain of marijuana from the seeds that you've grown. They talk about the THC, the tetrahydro cannabinoid. They talk about the CBD, the cannabinoid bidiol, which is the more purified version of it, or the ones that do not have the mind altering components of it. So I think from the very first instance, what we need to do is separate if we're talking about using the pure plant or we're talking about using the derivatives of the plant. If we're talking about it in terms of a recreational effect, where we're using, i.e. the pure plant that we may plant in our backyards or plant anywhere else, or we're taking the ones that have been engineered to a particular point and then extracts taken from them.
So the engineered ones are the ones, if we could use, for lack of a better term, mind altering?
No,
Or
so
those
it's
are the
going
good
to be
ones?
it's going to be your basic plant itself that has the THC in it that's going to cause more mind altering effects or the psychotropic effects, as opposed to the ones that are as the same plant but opposed to taking out the compounds that are less mind altering.
As ordinary Joe Blow smoker, how do I know the difference?
Who go on the side of the road?
Yeah,
buy a
I
bag,
buy
ounce
a dime bag,
or
I
a
buy the
dime
paper,
bag.
roll it.
So as
Light.
ordinary, yep. So what you're getting is probably pure plant. So you're getting it with the medicinal properties as well as the psychotropic capabilities as well, because you're not getting anything that has been extracted or purified in a roundabout way.
And is there a danger in that?
Well, if we're going back to it, then what you're talking about is the overrun or the more of the THC component of it or the psychotropic effects. Knowing that the THC or the tetrahydrocannabinoid is going to be affecting the neurohormones that we produce. So it causes
neurohormones.
I could break that down for you in 2 seconds if you give me a chance.
Sorry.
So you're talking about things like dopamine in the brain. So we know that the THC does affect the way the dopamine is released in the brain. We also know that the THC is going to affect how dopamine is able to bind to its receptors. So it is going to have some sort of negative effect on those in that area. To the point that we know that if you have an adolescent or a child that uses the cannabis, that before the age of 18, the use of it actually is going to predispose you to more negative effects later on in life.
This is something you ingest by smoking.
You could do it in many
Well,
different
there are other ways that people
Not
use
me.
it.
I don't ingest
No,
it by
sorry.
smoking
I
unless
don't
it's
think
secondhand
sorry,
smoke.
Let me
Okay.
qualify.
I appreciate you, sir.
I know they bake it in cookies and cakes and all kinds of things, but from a smoking perspective, because that is the thing that I think probably is most common. But are there any health issues related to that? The reason I ask is because, we all know the effects of the cigarette smoking and what that has done. But, I think, I don't know for sure. I don't have the statistics, but I would think that smoking is probably the most pervasive. But, what are there any possible health-related issues from smoking?
So in the offset, we always talked about nicotine and its risk of carcinogenicity or causing cancers, but it suggested that marijuana can do the same thing. And then I'm going to change that a little bit just from the health hazard of smoking or the risk of cancers And I'm going to take it back to the point that you were making before with other uses of cannabis or other forms of cannabis use. So I did some studies in a couple other countries, and one of the countries that I went in, that I trained in, I went to the unit, and there was a patient we called Santa, just because he had the typical look of Santa Claus, size, facial, everything. So Santa called me over and he says, "Fred, I got something for you." I said, "You have something for me, Santa?" He says, "Yeah, I got some cookies for you." I said, "Cookies for me, Santa? I don't need any cookies." So he says, "I got some cookies that were made with special butter that I have special milk to give you with it." So the point of that is that we are now expanding from just smoking, although that is probably the most common thing in the country. We are now not just not smoking, but we're making cookies, we're making brownies, people are making cakes. They're doing it in lots of things. Traditionally, in some of the other islands, they've made teas with them a long time ago for medicinal purposes, or not so medicinal purposes. The thing that I'd say with that is the one that becomes a little bit more, or is probably most efficacious in terms of the effects that you get from it, the euphoria and everything else, is smoking. And then the ones that we ingest, like when we do the cookies, when we do brownies, we do cakes, the milks, whatever else, the topical oils that we use generally are not as potent, and they don't go directly into the bloodstream as easily.
So when you hear this argument, does it chip away at the discussion that we had earlier that we should legalize and I guess make it a free-for-all?
It adds to it, and I'll tell you why it adds to it. It adds to it to the extent that we know that there's certain stereotypes and taboos which attach to this type of habit. I don't use, our doc doesn't use it, you don't use. But there are persons who will be inclined to using it. Even though we may exercise poor judgment, some of us have a right to do that. In circumstances such as those, there being no victim, why are you interfering with my right to do that? So I have no philosophical difficulty with the position which doc takes, but I think that this particular move or to legalize or decriminalize actually adds to the ease and the comfort with which you can bring people out of the dark ages, out of the shadows. Because we know some people who develop psychosis, psychological problems because I'm always sneaking around to do this. You become the object of ridicule in the family if you've been arrested, you've had a little marijuana in your pocket and the police have had to take you and not charge you, but perhaps charge you. Your family becomes is very embarrassed. What I'm suggesting is the legalization of its use, either medically or otherwise, brings people out of the shadows, and that should tend towards a wiser form of use.
But if
this is what the statistics
if there is a potential health risk, does that not come along with some level of responsibility?
Of course it does.
I mean, how do you leverage allowing people to use something legally that could potentially lead to health problems?
The model is alcohol,
but not just alcohol.
Or other forms of.
Let's go back to sodas.
Yes.
Because there's a potential risk to sodas as well because of what? The degree of sugars in them and the risk of diabetes.
So there's a long list. But here's my thing. We are an evolved society. If we know that in the past, or we're supposed to be evolved, in the past, that we have introduced, legalized, done things that have led to health issues, the destruction of the environment, all kinds of things. We know this, like aerosol sprays, all these things. I'm sure there were studies long before they hit the market as to what could have happened. Okay, so we know that by introducing potentially harmful things, it can lead to long-term things.
Yes.
Should we not now sort of take a different route to say, wait a minute, let's not introduce something that could potentially be a health risk?
But again, I think that we should do the exact opposite, which is to address this as a health-related issue and not to have it dealt with as if it's a criminal justice problem. Doc would be able to tell us better than I. That clearly, if a person is more comfortable, just come in and say, well, Doc, I have a problem. It's marijuana use. I want your assistance.
So that's not. We're not talking about straight just marijuana use on its own.
Well, any drug.
I don't think so, right?
Yes.
So I think that there's a benefit for some of the medicinal values of marijuana or some of the derived factors of marijuana. So we talk about marijuana affecting other deleterious forms of it, affecting the deleterious forms of the cannabinoids, affecting the frontal part of the brain, affecting memory, affecting the cerebellum, affecting the basal ganglia, areas that are responsible for motor movement. So we do know that in things like multiple sclerosis, we do know that in things with chronic pain syndromes that marijuana can help in those things, right?
So with the kid who was having multiple seizures.
So they do know that is a fact, or that is the fact that we're trying to prove now, because there's lots of literature that says that yes, we can use it in these things. However, we're still waiting for the official the papers, the scientific studies, the research that is done in a non-biased form that have enough numbers to say that this is truly the benefit.
But
so agreed. However, I think that we also should be cognizant of the fact that we're talking about two different things. We're not talking about giving our kids the right to go in the backyard and plant marijuana plants. What we're talking about, or have a joint in your bag. What we're trying to do is say that, yes, I can create this derivative that's going to help this under medical supervision, with the knowledge that that can also be dependence on that, as we have with other medical drugs.
And remember now, I am of legal age when I'm 18. So clearly, we're not encouraging the use of marijuana under that age, as we would not do with alcohol. And remember, I understand as marijuana poses certain difficulties for young developing persons up until age 18 to 21. Well, clearly, the medical community, Dr. Smith and others, would be able to advise us if we just decide to go in this direction. What would be a safe regime of use?
So let's look at the whole consumption of alcohol, if you want to use that as a benchmark. Yes. I know personally, 15, 16 years old. You drink in the Bahamas. You walk in, you buy a beer, you buy liquor, you go to a family party. That's where it starts. So, again, my argument is we know what the possibilities are for the introduction of something like this into our society, into the community. Are we prepared to put in the correct safeguards?
It's going to be a question of political will. You know, Jerome, you're an expert at this. You know it better than most of us. You know that most decisions are made at a certain level. If the politicians would take the experts, Dr. Smith and others, seriously and sit down and have a serious conversation, bring the church in, put on the other side, and to say, listen, how do we do this if we do this?
The church just says no.
That's
an easy one.
The
church just says no.
And it may very well be that we have to sit back and say, Pastor, I love you, but I'm not in this one. We're going to take a pass. And pastor will simply have to step up the way pastor stepped up with the legalization of gambling. Not of them now, there was this fear that, the hordes would become hooked.
Sunday shopping.
Exactly. It would change our society and make it a much more terrible place. We have to rely upon the experts.
There are arguments
that
if you want to talk about gaming that it has.
Well, and to the extent that you deal with the problem, which is
they have something on which to stand.
But this dichotomy of keeping it illegal clearly wasn't working because it was operating in the shadows. Now you can treat people and then not embarrassed to step in and say, I have a gambling addiction. Can you help me? Dr. Smith would then say yes or no. But it wouldn't be a question of the police officer on the street who has more important things to do, arresting her or arresting him.
Gentlemen, we are at the point of a break in the show. I just want to say this much. I know very few people who have come forward to say they have a gambling addiction. Very few. But I know there are many out there who have all the signs of participating.
Yes.
We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Stay with us. On the Record continues. We are back right after this quick break.
Rev Go Play, the new mobile app that delivers your favorite live streaming TV channels, is here, and it's free to all Rev TV subscribers. Download the app from the Bahamas iOS App Store or Google Play Store. Launch the app and log in with your My Account email address and password. The TV Everywhere revolution you've been waiting on is here. Rev Go Play. Go everywhere with Rev Go.
Sign up for Rev Go Play and win a trip to the 2018 Sobe Food and Wine Festival.
Welcome back. This is the final segment of this episode. Tonight we're discussing marijuana, legalize it or criticize it. Our guest for this segment continues to be Dr. Frederick Smith and attorney Fane Thompson. The big argument has been, for the most part, in support of medical marijuana. I want to talk a little bit about some of the successes in the treatment of some diseases and illnesses as a result of the medical marijuana, and in the terms that you would have described earlier on.
So we know that medical marijuana has had benefit in terms of a lot of the pain relief clinics. So we do have people who have chronic pain that sometimes even our opioids and those sort of things have not been able to keep on the bay, but marijuana has. Traditionally, I think here in the Bahamas, we're still using the quote-unquote recreational marijuana, and people are just smoking it under the radar. So which then goes back into the point that if you legalize it a little bit, then you may actually have that person not having to sneak and get it at risk of law. But I think my stand on that is what we need to do is figure out how to get the medical variety in as opposed to the types that are going to cause euphoria. Albeit, it's said that a big part of pain relief is the euphoric feeling that you get. So there is the medical marijuana in that regard. There's medical marijuana in regard to the whole thing of appetite stimulants when people have, again, sometimes cancers. There's the medical marijuana in the use of glaucoma, and also in movement disorders. So I'm sure that there must be a place for it. It's like anything else. You take a plant, you take a derivative out of it, and then you go ahead and you use it, but you use the derived form. I guess the same thing can be said with the opioids that we have now, opium. But we do have things like tincture of opium that we used to use for certain conditions. But again, it's not the opium that I've taken out of the field, put it inside the water pipe and smoke it. It's not the opium that I'm going to take and wrap and smoke.
Do you think that we are advanced enough to be able to create this industry where we grow, harvest, extract for medical purposes or for the use of treating chronic illnesses?
I'm sure. Don't they have it in some states now?
I mean in the Bahamas, and I don't mean the United States. I mean from our perspective.
What you trying to do is get me to be politically incorrect because
it's an honest question because if we're talking about to Faye's point, if we're talking about making this an industry now, we have all this land, that we can grow the plant on. I don't know the conditions under which it grows, but you're looking at a potential industry. So I guess Faye, you could speak to this then. Are there the proper safeguards in place or the proper mechanisms in place to be able to properly grow, harvest, and use this plant?
One of the obvious difficulties that we have not anticipated, but a friend of mine mentioned it to me. He said, we can't move in the direction of decriminalization or even regularization until we get to the point of accepting that we will have to grow this locally. Because the importation and the exportation of this substance is still illegal. And to the extent that we even have this conversation, we must also anticipate the role that farmers would play in terms of producing a crop from which we would take these items to be dealt with scientifically.
We can't grow onions here.
That's right. And even in industry, the various ancillary industries which will pop up, that's going to be important as part of a general conversation as to how we legalize or decriminalize. We can't decriminalize that which is illegal to bring into this country. So it will have to be grown locally.
This speaks to a larger issue. Our people don't want to get involved in farming.
I'm sure they'll farm marijuana. They may not want to farm onions, but they'll do marijuana.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true, Doc. Yeah.
Because we choose what we want to do.
It's a cash crop.
It is. Okay.
It's a very, it's good return on your investment. It's cash crop.
And then again, you're also going to think about, if you're talking about it, you're going to think about the people that are using it or growing it, and then those of us that are going to get the added benefits of it because we want to use it recreationally as well.
I want to just mention one lady. I'm not going to call her name. I can't do that because, of course, I would not do that. But I have a pastor friend.
You just called the name.
No, I didn't. A pastor, well, I would mean that they would have been knocking many doors. We got hundreds of them. His mother has some serious issues. Off the record, he says, I will not allow her to die, meet her maker in pain. And you can read between the lines. And that has to happen in the Bahamas. That a person's turn to illegal substances, which ought not, in circumstances such as these, not be illegal, because it gives her that sense of ease of her pain and so forth, and she can cope. That's right. She can cope.
I cannot blame anyone for that because you can't. The human nature in you will not sit by and allow a family member, particularly a mother, to suffer and pain when there is something that you can do to help, whether it be illegal or not.
And something that you can afford, as opposed to turning to OxyContin and Doc, you're better at this than I am. These opioids, which are highly addictive, etc., and expensive.
So let's not do that, because marijuana in its recreation form is highly addictive as well.
Okay, all right. I'm prepared to accept that. You see,
so I'm not sure if we've gotten one benefit for another.
But I see, for example, tag marijuana with no greater sense of disapproval because of its addictive quality. See, to me, the conversation is whether or not we want to continue in a society where the illegality of a substance continues to destabilize our society and deny persons medical relief.
My opioids are scheduled, class 1 scheduled drugs, just as marijuana is in the U.S.
Okay. Well,
so
again, this is where I defer to the experts.
Class 1 scheduled. So in some states, you talk about federal law versus state law, and in some of them, they have federal law that allows it, state law that doesn't allow it. So you can still get locked up for it.
Of course, the federal law is the law of the land. Right.
So, and it's the same sort of thing with our opioids. So because of that, the law that's going to allow them has them as a class 1 scheduled drug, an opioid. And it's the same thing that we do with the meperidine, or the same thing that we do with the codeine and that sort of thing. They all scheduled under the same sort of umbrellas.
Just so that our audience understands, these are administered under very strict guidelines and conditions.
In the country. As we speak.
Interesting. Okay. What is, I guess, the best form, if you could, of, if we were to move to this medical marijuana, what would be the best form? Pills and liquid?
I think that's a broad question that I don't have a definitive answer for, simply because we don't know all of the properties and we don't know how we'll be able to concentrate versus or fully concentrate or get what we need out of it. So that's like asking me, what is the better form? Codeine is a tablet, codeine is a liquid, codeine is an injection. Depending on what we're using it for, it's all going to be very different.
Depending on how quickly it needs to work and where it's going in the body and that kind of stuff. Okay, understood. Fane, are we ready really for this? Are we ready for the legalization of this or for the introduction of this as an industry in the Bahamas?
It's overdue. It's overdue. It's overdue to the extent that if we want to really regularize, return our nation to the fishing village, more people nowadays though than in the 1980s, 1970s, that it ought to be, we have to find a way to take away the criminality of an activity which is...
return to a fishing village?
Well, at least the placid nation. The placid nation. Overnight. I want to just turn to Portugal.
Please qualify.
Yes, I will. Let's turn to Portugal. Portugal, overnight, the society changed. In terms of the level of violence and destabilization.
Changing, but back to a fishing village?
Well, I don't mean that. It's figuratively speaking.
Let's take away the marijuana.
A much more peaceful place there.
Okay.
Let's go back. Let's go from marijuana back to nicotine products. So at one time, and not whether it's legalized or not, because the tobacco products are legalized, but you want us to go to the place where we've almost had tobacco all over the place, everybody using tobacco. Then Surgeon General comes out and say, okay, don't use it if you're under this age, don't use it if it's pregnant, to the point where they're almost trying to tell you not to use tobacco products.
It has to be regulated. It has to be regulated.
All over again. So in the same breath, we want to bring in marijuana freely to then realize the same thing that was causing us problems, we've now allowed is going to cause us more problems, and then we're going to have to find some way to
that was to my question.
To create more work for our police officers.
There was a time cigarette smoking was glorified. I remember newscasters used to be on the air smoking.
I like that. I like that picture. The newscaster, Jerome on air with the big spliff. No, the truth of the matter is, this is comical, but comic relief, but it's fear-mongering. It's scare-mongering. That's not what's not going to happen, because in all circumstances where legalization or decriminalization have occurred, we have seen reductions in use. Let me finish, Doc.
All right, sir.
We've seen reductions in use. Sometimes a bump in use, but then reductions in use. In other words, the graph shows that society is no more enamored with the use of drugs after decriminalization as opposed to before. I'll give you a case in point. I'll use a case in point. A case in point. Portugal. And I always rely and turn to Portugal. It's the biggest laboratory, and it has had the most tremendous success, even in terms of examining the effect of drug use after decriminalization. And all statistics show reduction in use.
You have a different view.
Absolutely. And I mean, not to talk about.
Are you familiar with the Portuguese experiment?
It's very familiar with it. But I want to take it even more locally. So, if we look at our alcohol consumption has skyrocketed like nobody's business. We made it more legal. We made it more accessible.
I don't have very much faith in the empirical data locally because we don't keep we don't keep data. So I'm relying upon the scientific
you don't need to. You don't forget about the.
This is
the
anecdotal.
data
Your statement.
No, I'm talking about there's now another bar on every corner. There are more bars everywhere you go, as in business. They're always busy. When everybody else closed and everybody's empty, the bar's full.
Especially on the Friday after.
You know what?
Don't forget, let's not even do Friday. Let's talk about Sunday when everybody used to be in church. So they used to say that there was a church on every corner. Then we said there's a church and a bar on every corner. Now we say there's a church, bar, and a number house on every corner. The bar always full now, because what people used to do was take their children to church. They used to go sit in the bar whilst they were in church.
Or wait till church was
over. Now, everybody in the bar and the church is empty. Everybody in the number house, going from the number house. So I'm not trying to.
Hysterical for us
I don't think so.
I don't think everybody's in the bar. You
so
use the word
absolutely
everybody.
not.
That sounds a bit. Yeah. Everybody's not in the bar.
My
now,
apologies.
Having left the church.
I withdraw, sir.
What is the long-term
Plenty people inside the bar.
on the society? What
The
is
long-term
effect?
Jerome, I invite you and Dr. Smith. I challenge people those who are watching us.
Sorry, let me back up.
Portugal is the experiment.
Using the example of the bar room and even the gaming house.
But
What have we seen the negative effect?
We have not seen that.
We have not
Based
seen
upon what I understand,
disagree.
the anecdotal evidence is I've heard ministers say, we have too many gaming houses. I've heard people say things like there are too many bars in the Bahamas. We've had too many bars long before this conversation with marijuana began.
I agree
A
with
long
you.
time ago.
So I'm not
suggesting
pegging
to you,
it to say the same thing.
And I think I'm amazed at the doctor because he's being a bit histrionic when we speak about this particular question. It's a scientific conversation, and it takes place based upon looking at the various examples which have worked out.
But Fane, do you
and
not-
I don't think, Doc, that you've really looked at the example of Portugal or Switzerland.
I have looked at Portugal and I have looked at Switzerland, but I'm also looking at what we see in our hospitals.
Okay, Doc, I have to defer to you.
I'm looking at what
But I
we
do not know that.
So you want to talk about local things? I can tell you what we see locally.
Okay.
We see a lot of the heart disease that's associated with alcohol.
Okay, fine.
I
can't dispute that.
All I am trying to bring out it with and whether you want to call me what's the term again,
Histrionic.
sir? Histrionic. I have to Google that word, and I think that I have the good use of the Queen's language. All I'm saying is that I think that with legalizing it, legalizing it or decriminalizing, what you're going to have is a rise in the use of it. And with the rise in the use of it as a recreational tool, we're going to have more of the medical complications.
Okay. And this is where I think we will have to invite you to join us because your expertise is helpful. But again, the reports and the surveys that I've seen, and I've taken years now to look at this question, shows a decline in use. The sexiness of it, because of its taboo status, goes away. Young people are not necessarily inclined to use it because it's the thing to do. It's sexy. So, and this is information which we have garnered from real reports: Colorado, Washington State, Portugal, Switzerland, especially the Nordic countries. They have seen a decided reduction in abuse as a result of bringing it into the mainstream.
So, gentlemen, we are just about out of time. I will allow the doctor to have the final word in all of this. Fane, you've had more time. So I'm going to defer to Dr. Smith. Really, some closing words from you, certainly for the decision makers and those who have interest in this, who may be watching. Yes. What do you say to them tonight as they watch this broadcast, as we now look at the possibility of legalizing something that has been so reviled in the community for so long?
So I think that there are some medical benefits of using certain strains. I think that there's still some more research that we need to do to see what those endpoints are going to be in terms of treatment of diseases. But I think that there is some value of it. I just don't think that the total legalizing of it in terms of recreational components is the road that we should travel. And again, that's my opinion. That's not the PHA's opinion.
No.
That's not my boss's. That's mine.
Thank you for coming on. No. Fane, the name of your organization again?
Citizens Against Prohibition Bahamas. Okay. We're on Facebook. We invite people to come to the blog and view. We've been there now for the past 3 to 4 years. And each and every point that has been raised in this conversation tonight, we have dealt with.
Well, no, I wanted to bring that up so people will have a forum to go, you know, and to read and to understand and to give their opinions, because in order for us to move towards developing this society, we must continue to have rational conversations, and, you know, I encourage people to leave emotion out of it, you know, and
let's end the
have-
drug war for our boys.
Yes, no, very, very important. Hopefully, very soon we'll be talking to the hierarchy of the police force to begin to talk about our crime problem. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you, sir.
Very special thank you to our previous guest, Attorney David Cash, Attorney Fane Thompson. Thank you also, Dr. Frederick Smith, for being here this evening. I'd also like to thank my producer, technical staff, and of course you, our audience, for watching week after week. Be sure and join us for more On the Record next week, same time, same place. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. We'll see you next time.